situation is. It is well east of Brisbane at the moment, although as you can see, the windiest weather is from the centre of that storm right to the coastline. New South Wales now more at risk, as today's modelling does shift the tracking a little bit further towards that New South Wales border. We'll talk about that in a moment. Look at the shape, very large centre to this storm at the moment, and while the winds are gale force all the way around it still, that's why it's category 2 when we recorded this, you notice it's a little bit of a sort of elongated shape now, and some of the strongest winds are in a sort of a line feeding in rather than perfectly around it. Very normal once a cyclone leaves the tropics, moving into the subtropics and sort of dropping into cooler atmosphere, cooler sea temperatures, you'll find that the structure of the cyclone starts to change. It's a little bit like when you've got the too many blankets and towels in the washing machine and it's doing the spin and it all gets a bit lopsided and the washing machine starts to shake. That's what we're seeing a wee bit here with the cyclone. So most of the heavy rain is in the southern quadrant, much drier on the top half of the cyclone, but those gale force damaging winds still go all the way around it. The steering force is this high pressure zone exiting Bass Strait into Tasmania and moving towards New Zealand. And as it does that, the bubble of high pressure goes along to the east, and there's a bit of a vacuum behind it. That allows the remnants of Alfred to move down the eastern side of Australia, bringing rain to dry areas that need it, but it also might be too much of a good thing for some areas, especially in the coastal northeast. So let's try and break down where it's going. Here's the current tracking from the Bureau of Meteorology. This tracking and the category numbers may change a little bit. Whether it's a low-end category 2 or a high-end category 1, very little difference in the wind speeds. The area here in the pale shading and the sort of white shading, that shows where the gale force winds are. But the area in the middle here with the pink shading, those are the damaging hurricane force winds. And so that's the area as it moves in. That's why the exact tracking matters, is for just this portion of really damaging winds in the middle. So wherever the line goes with the tracking, that goes with it as it moves in. Of course, it might weaken as it moves in. Category 1 is expected once it makes landfall. But it's hard to kind of know just yet what it will be. And you see the risk zone here from Bundaberg to Grafton from the Bureau of Meteorology. Let's have a look at the wave heights. These are still enormous at the moment. 8, 9 metre waves, some going up over that, 11, 12 metres offshore. So this is a bit of a quick animation. Here is Brisbane, and further down the coast there is Sydney. You've got the cyclone offshore here, and the biggest waves are also in the southwestern quadrant. Let's, and you can see the key down here showing 6, 7, 8 metre swells. Let's animate this now for the days ahead and see that surge as it moves in. The waves go up as it moves in towards the coastline, and the centre of that cyclone coming in right towards Brisbane, with the biggest waves south of that, Gold Coast and down towards New South Wales. Also worth noting that at the centre of the storm, you have a storm surge. It's like the cyclone's a giant vacuum cleaner in the sky, and it lifts up the sea into a bit of a dome underneath it by maybe another ½ metre. So you've got the big waves on top of the dome, and then you've got the gale force winds blowing it all inland to these eastern areas. So that's why coastal erosion, dangerous seas, a serious part of the cyclone, as are the winds. Now, I mentioned before, it's got a bit lopsided now. You can see the worst of the winds on the western and southern quadrants of it. Not as much over here in the northeastern side, and that's the part that's offshore mostly. So this is the part moving in. Show you the animation. It repeats itself a couple of times to get the idea of what is happening as it moves in. So it does get a little more compressed as it comes in. That's quite normal because the cyclone's interacting with land. But here is the final placement that we show you here, coming through towards the later part of Thursday evening.
We can pick it up
you can see those strong damaging winds going in from about Lismore to Brisbane, especially around the Gold Coast and the border between New South Wales and Queensland. Now, this exact tracking still is yet to be confirmed, but we're starting to sort of narrow in on the areas that are most exposed, and here certainly the most damaging winds coming in from Brisbane, the largest population in Queensland, and coming in towards the Gold Coast with all those buildings right on the waterfront. So you just need to be aware, very strong winds, storm surge, those two parts of the cyclone. And then of course, you've got the rain. So let's have a look and see what is happening as we track the cyclone in the days ahead. 10 o'clock tomorrow, Wednesday, cyclone's still offshore, but the rain's setting in from about the border all the way down to basically Sydney. You're seeing wet weather kicking in for you. Lord Howe Island, you're away from the worst of it. You've got some big clouds around you, a little bit of wet weather, but it's not as bad for you, even though it looks very ominous. Thursday morning, now you start to feel the real effects of this cyclone coming in. The rain will become more intense, the winds become stronger, and the sea may not be as low as it should be at low tide. And that becomes more of a problem once the rivers start to really fill up with water and you've got high tide and a storm surge blocking it, and that can cause coastal flooding. And there's a lot of low-lying estuaries around Brisbane itself, but also along the eastern coastline, a number of low-lying areas that just aren't used to seeing big swells and waves like this moving on through. As we go into the exact time of landfall, that's a little trickier to lock in. It looks like Thursday night, Friday morning. Here's the American modelling showing by 1 in the morning on Friday, it's already right over the border here between New South Wales and Queensland, with the worst of the wind and rain pushing actually in to New South Wales from Lismore northwards, Brisbane southwards. Compare that to the European modelling, shows it a little bit further northwards, coming directly in to the Gold Coast and around Brisbane, and further southwards with the heaviest rain right on the border there of New South Wales and Queensland and going into the northern rivers. And then we go through here to the Australian modelling that shows 4 o'clock in the morning further northwards towards Maroochydore. Now their tracking may also drift southwards. All those other ones might lift a little further northwards. We're still not totally clear on that. That'll be another day or so. It'll be Wednesday before we can really lock in where the landfall is most likely to occur. But you're noticing it's narrowing where those risk areas certainly are. All the heavy rain falling south of the road.
North Queensland gets tropical cyclones every year, so
yes, there is some rain going up to about Harvey Bay, but the
we
heaviest
don't get it often.
southern quadrant, and that goes all the way down to Lismore, and I'm sure you don't want to hear about that in Lismore. Now the rain is going to be broken up as we go in towards the weekend. The low itself falls apart between basically St George and Moree, and you've got heavy rain continuing further down around the hills of Coffs Harbour, Port Macquarie, and still west of Brisbane as well. So wet weather from Brisbane to Port Macquarie still pushing in, and this very tropical northeasterly flow feeding into you. By Sunday, here's the news many of you might like, especially if you're in the outback, seeing all that rain falling across New South Wales into areas that have not had rain for a long time. So that is some good news. Hopefully it's not too much of a good thing, because there will be embedded thunderstorms, severe thunderstorms in there as well, as you've got that daytime heating mixing into it. The good news up around places like Lismore is the rain clouds do break up. So it might be a very heavy burst of rain for a day or two and then it breaks apart. That's the silver lining, I guess, I can give to you. And rainfall-wise, here is the big picture. So look, the bulk of that rain coming smack back in between Brisbane and Lismore, and with this current thinking, but it spreads all the way down. Now the black line you see here on the map, that's the dividing range, which means rain that falls east of that black line drains out to sea. So that's an unfortunate map to show the heaviest rain is all falling on the eastern side, which means the bulk of that rain is then going to drain back towards the more populated areas. So that does pose a risk for Brisbane City all the way down to Port Macquarie, and maybe even further south than that, because this is still only an estimate of where it's all going. So there we go, that is the setup. Here is the infrared satellite imagery, the center of Alfred right here. You can see how lopsided it is on this map. All that heavy rain further to the south, and the top half of it is dry. That's very similar to what happened in New Zealand just over 2 years ago with Cyclone Gabrielle. When that came down, that had the equivalent of Category 3 strength, and it looked just like this. The top part of it was very dry, but we had many deaths and a lot of flooding damage. So worth keeping in mind. This one's a little less powerful than Gabrielle was, but you can see there's a lot of energy in the clouds here, and that is all going to be moving inland over the next couple of days. So stay up to date with the Bureau of Meteorology. They do all your local warnings. They'll give you better numbers that are more specific to the area that you're in, and their tracking as well. That tracking map of the cyclone is going to still shift a little bit, but it's certainly becoming more fine-tuned to Brisbane itself and the border of New South Wales and Queensland. That's all for us today. Back again tomorrow, Wednesday, as we fine-tune the track of Cyclone Alfred